This is going to be a quick little demonstration on how to make a fondant flower and then stick it on a cupcake. So I have some fondant here that's already colored yellow, and this is the fondant that I use. I get the Wilton brand. Some people make it. I don't like making it. It's a lot of work. But this is the box that I get, and it's a 5-pound box, and it comes inside the box. You get 2 of these. They're wrapped up separately, so you get 2 of these packs, so that way it keeps one fresh if you're not going to use the whole thing. You do want to make sure that you seal it up really good when you're not using it. So whenever I've opened a package, I just make sure I tape it really well and try to keep all the air out of it, because then it will get a little crusty. You can still kind of revive it if it's within its expiration date and hasn't expired yet. You can warm it up in the microwave to get it soft again, so something you can work with. But you kind of want to avoid letting it get crusty, because it does get a little harder to work with. So I have some that's already colored yellow. I always like to wear gloves when I work with fondant, not just because it's sticky and because it's something that you're going to eat, but also because when you're working with the colors, you'll get the food coloring all over your hands, and it's just nice to have gloves on just in case any of it comes out or gets on your fingers. So I'm going to set a little bit of my yellow aside for center on the flower. So I just set that little piece aside, and I have way too much, more than I'm going to need for one flower. And I'm going to also set a little chunk aside that's going to be turned green for leaves. Okay, kind of working with the colors here, so that way I can do the least amount of work. And then I'm going to put a little pink in this to make this a petal color. So this will be for my flower. So maybe it'll be like a salmon color, depending on how much pink comes out. I'm just going to put a little dab for now. And you always want to work it inward. So you put your kind of smush your fondant out. You put your dot of food coloring in the middle there. It's better to use the gels than the liquid. You don't really want to add any liquid to fondant, so I'm using the gels here, squeeze gels from Decopack. And then you're going to just sort of work it in. Fold it over again, fold it over again. You can stretch it until you kind of start to see it marbling its way through. Okay, and this way you avoid getting it all over your gloves, because then your gloves get unnecessarily gooey and messy, and it makes it just a little bit sticky and hard to work with. So maybe this will make like a nice coral peachy color for the flower, and work it in until you don't see any stripes anymore. If it's nice and soft, fresh fondant, or fondant that's warm because you've been working with it in your hands, it'll be easy to do this. Once you get to the color you want, you can stop mixing. I might just add another tiny little drop of pink in there, because I want it to be a little more corally than orange. Work that in. All right, that color is pretty good. It's a little pinky, not quite orange, and it's different from the yellow. So you can see a nice difference when you hold the yellow up to it. So I know my center is going to stand out in the middle of it. Okay, so then just kind of sort of flatten it out. Keep the same thickness. I still want it to be fairly thick. And then you can use a rolling pin, or you can just use your hands to flatten it out. I just use one of these heavy plastic rolling pins. It's just small enough to work on a small surface, so you don't have to break out a huge wooden rolling pin. That's not necessary. All right, and kind of maintain that same thickness. So let one side of it get too thin. What will usually happen when you're using a rolling pin is the sides will be super, super thin, like paper thin, and then the middle will have a dome where it's harder to get to. So sometimes if I'm using a bigger piece of fondant, like I need to cover a cake, I really focus on that middle section first, and then I don't really even worry about the edges, because those are easy to get. You can even press it down if you need to with your hands to get that nice thin piece in the middle. All right, you don't want it to be too thin either, because you want to be able to pick it up. So I have these little cutters. You could just use any cookie cutters. These are Wilton ones, but you can use any kind. These came in a set, so that's why everything is purple, so they all match. And then I would say if you were going to try to get more than one flower out of this, go to the edge so you can get 2 flowers. But I'm only going to get 1 out of here, so I'll just go to the middle. Press it down with your whole hand until you can kind of feel it sink down and touch the table. A lot of times when people have trouble pulling this out and getting their flower to release from the rest of the fondant, it's because it didn't press down all the way. So press it down really good, and then I always do this little wiggle, wiggle, wiggle while pressing down, and it sort of loosens it up a little bit. It creates a little bit of space around between this and the outer part, and then the piece you're cutting out, and then you'll have a nice clean cut. Okay, and then this can be wadded back up into a ball and used again. You could be saved in an airtight container, seal it up in a bag or something for another project. Okay, so now we have this little flower. Make sure it comes up off the table. Okay, and then you have some other little options and things you can do with it if you don't want it to be just a flat kind of plain flower. You can use something like this end of this will create like a little, if you press down on the petal, you can create like a little shell look on it. So it looks kind of neat because when you press on it, it just kind of creates those little lines on the petals. You can do the same thing with a toothpick though if you don't have one of these fancy tools, so that's what I'll use on mine. So you can just take the toothpick and you can just sort of lay it down and make little indentations so it looks like maybe these are little ridges in the petals. And I'm angling it, it's kind of like, looks almost like bird feet, like a little bird print. And I'm just making sure that I angle it, one in the middle, one on the sides, like that. Like a V with one going down the middle. Okay, and that's a really simple one. You don't need to have some kind of fancy tool like this to do anything like that. The ball on the end is something you might use more for like gum paste. A lot of people think fondant and gum paste are the same thing. Gum paste comes in a different container like this, and gum paste is meant to make a flower, lay it out. It gets so hard and crunchy. If you leave it out long enough, it'll get like ceramic. It becomes so hard. So it's more like for maybe making a decoration piece that's really not going to be eaten, but it could be. Fondant, people like to eat that stuff. I don't like the taste of it, and I don't like the gooey texture. It's just a little too chewy for me. But you know, fondant never gets as hard as the gum paste does. So that's kind of the difference there. So, but you would use a ball tool like this to kind of roll and ripple your petals if you were using gum paste, which we're not. All right, now we need a center. So we're going to take our little bit of yellow. Let me move that aside. Okay. And I won't even need to roll this with the rolling pin. It's just such a tiny bit. I'm just going to smush it pretty flat. And I'm going to cut a circle with this tiny little circular cutter, which you could also use if you don't have one of these tiny, and don't forget to wiggle, one of these tiny little cutters. You could always just use a tip. You could use a piping tip, decorator tip, and you could use the end of it if it has a wide hole at the end so you can poke something through to get it out. So there's our perfect little center. If your fondant is sticky enough, you could go ahead and stick it right on there. If it has dried out and the surface has formed a bit of a dry skin over the top, I'll show you what you can do. Some people will take a ball of fondant and throw it into a little bit of water and sort of shake it around and form what they call a glue. It's like an edible glue, and they brush that on. I find that you don't even need to add anything sugary to it. If this has dried up and you're trying to stick something to it, you can just dip a paintbrush that isn't used on paint into the water. Dab just the tiniest little bit of water on there, and then you can stick your center on like that. And then once it, you don't want to smush it. This is also nice for even if your fondant is still fresh and you go to stick it on there, it'll stick. But sometimes you find you have to smush it down a little bit to get it to stick, and you don't want to do that because when you do that, when you're putting pressure on the flower, you're not realizing that the rest of it is also very, still very soft and malleable. So you don't want to destroy it, the little flower you just made. So just gently tap it on there with a little bit of water and then set it aside and let it dry. We do need to make some leaves now, so we need to make some green. And I'm also going to show a little trick, something you can do with that flower to give it more of like a flower shape. So this is just a little piece of an egg carton. And if you separate it into pieces, this is something that's really easy to store somewhere. You could even stick it like in the fridge or whatever if you want to make a flower and stick it in there. Some people do this with buttercream flowers. But I'll just kind of make sure I'm carefully putting it down in the center so it doesn't go, crooked on the side. But if you press it down into the little cup, it's making the petals sort of form upward like that. And if you were to let this sit out and dry that way, it would dry with the petals sort of sticking up like that. It's just a cuter look. I like it better. And you can tuck it way down in there. So just a neat little trick, something you can try. All right, so we set that little flower aside, and we're going to still use the same color we started with as yellow. And we're going to put a drop of green in our yellow because those colors can go together and it won't mess with the shade. Okay, and then just the same way, right in the middle, and you fold it inside itself. And keep doing that until you start to see the color streaking through, and you'll want to keep mixing back and forth until that color is thoroughly mixed in. This might be a very light neon green, which is fine because I think it goes well with our coral color that we have right here. Okay, and some people stop once it's still marbly. Some people like that look. And if you're draping fondant over a cake, that's not a bad look to go for. So it's easy anyways. It's easy to achieve. You don't have to keep mixing. And this working with a little bit of fondant is a whole lot easier than having a big lump of fondant that you have to work out and soften and then roll to put over like a 10-inch cake. That's when you really hate working with fondant. But it's fun when you get to work on little projects like this. You know, just adding little doodads to your cake. All right, so then I think I'll make 2 leaves for this flower. So I will roll this out a little bit. Kind of hold your wax paper down, which I forgot to mention, I'm working on wax paper. Hold your wax paper down with one hand and roll with the other, okay? And then this is just a cute little leaf. It's got all these little ridges on there, but do you want to do the same thing? Go to the edge so you can get the most use out of it. Press down all the way, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Do another one, press down all the way. Feel it once it hits the table, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Peel them up. I could use them just like that because they are super cute, but I'm going to use a toothpick again. I'm going to just drag it through, give myself little veins on the leaf. And I won't stop there. I'm going to go up the sides too. Just a few. I don't know, it just gives it a little something extra. Makes it look special. A little more realistic without going overboard. Okay, so then we gotta stick these underneath our flower. So let's lay them down where we think we want them. Maybe one right there. Maybe one right there. And then with our little cup of water and our brush, we're gonna put a little bit of water just here where the flower is gonna touch. Okay. Lay your flower back down on top of those leaves. All right, and we're gonna let it dry just like that while we're working on the cupcake. All right, and I just have a single cupcake right here. Some people like to pull the paper off before they decorate. I never like to do that because it's a nice wrapper and I don't like getting my hands dirty. So I like having a little something you can hold it with if you're gonna eat it, or hand it to someone. It's just a little nicer than getting cake crumbs all over your hands. So I just have a little bit of buttercream frosting here in a cup, and I have a small little cake spatula that I'll use to apply it. It's already pretty soft, but if you want, you can just sort of work out some of those bubbles, little air bubbles that form in there. Smooth it out just a bit. I'm going to leave it white. I'm not going to color this one because I want the color of my flower to stand out the most. But I think if I was going to color it, I'd probably do blue or something. So what I'm going to do is start with getting a nice little blob of icing right on top of the cupcake. Maybe a little bit more. All right. And I'm going to work it in, doing this little back and forth motion. I am holding the spatula flat on the cake, but just sort of going back and forth, just like this, okay? And it doesn't have to look perfect. In fact, a nice look is to leave it kind of rough iced because everything else is smooth. You know, your fondant is really nice and smooth, so I'm going to leave it just like that. All right. Pop the little flower out of there. Come on. And I know we haven't let it sit for very long, so it could flatten back out, but we're just going to stick it right on the top, kind of wedge it in there, just like that. And it's all done. Super simple. You can even make these flowers ahead of time, leave them out, and when you need cupcakes for something, you're going to bake some cupcakes, and then you can take them out, other little eggshell pieces, and you can assemble your cupcakes really quick, and that's the hardest part's already done for you.